The world has changed, leading many to question the future of the economy and their personal finances. Burton understands the changing dynamics of the market and the economic realities facing our communities. No one can predict the future, but having an advisor that maximizes your tax advantages and helps achieve your financial goals can lead to greater stability. Let Burton's accountants and advisors help protect you, your family, and your business. Burton LLP. We listen, we solve, we do.
Hey, Max. Hey, Rick.
Good morning. Good morning to all our viewers. My name is Max Gross. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Commercial Observer. Thank you all who are tuning in today. One of the things that we've been thinking about a lot over the last few months has been the topic of diversity. How does a rich industry opens itself up to people from different backgrounds? And for a long time, the answers have felt dissatisfying. But I don't think that anybody should wait any longer. I think the time to answer that question is now. So how do we do this? It feels even more urgent in the middle of a pandemic. And one of the solutions has been internships and summer jobs. And that is something that feels like yet another casualty of the coronavirus, although maybe not. But to discuss this today, we've invited three people who could, I think, lend their insight. Cedric Bobo, the CEO and co-founder of Project Destined, Rick Clark, the chairman of Brookfield Property Partners, and James Whelan, the president of Rebney. And before we get started, I did want to say a thank you to our sponsor for today's program, Burton LLP, who produced the video that you all watched before we started. And I would invite people who have questions to submit them through the question function at the bottom of the Zoom chat here. But we already actually got a ton of questions in advance, so that will make for a good discussion today. But welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Max.
Good morning.
How are you, Cedric?
Good morning, Max.
Morning, Rick. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So let's start with what I brought up, the summer job, the summer internship. That's always been kind of the pipeline to people who were not in the industry, who wanted to get into the industry. What's been happening this summer? And anybody could jump right in. Rick, why don't you start? Because you're
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's been super difficult. Many businesses, at least locally, have begun to go back to work, and it's just hard given the limitations we're all facing on social distancing, et cetera, to have interns physically come into our office. So what we've done is a couple of things. We've pivoted and gone to sort of virtual internships. I think there are 5 or 6 week internships. We'll do the best that we can. I think overall internships are important. They help the students bridge the gap between classroom learning and real life experience. They give them exposure to our industry, and which helps them learn whether or not a career in the industry is complementary to their interests. It helps them, navigate how to work in a professional environment and in a team setting, and also feeds their curiosity and helps develop their confidence. So, we think it's important. We've gone virtual with our internships, but we've also partnered with folks like Project Destined to help expand our capabilities there.
Cedric,
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about Project Destin for those who don't know?
Yeah, well, first, I think Rick's being extraordinarily modest, and they've done a ton, and I'll describe their work with us. But Project Destin, quite simply, I mean, we're an education platform that partners with corporate schools, really to create a new generation of owners. I mean, yes, we want to create jobs along the way and internships, but ultimately, we're trying to get our students to the place of becoming owners. I mean, this summer, I mean, hit everyone. I mean, scrumptious. In the sense that lots of students around New York were extraordinarily excited about internships in those way. Fortunately for us, Rick, for the last couple of years, I gave Rick a call and we began discussing what can we do with Project Destin in Brookfield to begin building an internship pipeline in these really unique circumstances. Rick called Jim Whelan, and literally within 2 weeks, we got 100 internships, all virtual, with leading real estate partners around New York. Yes, it hit us like a bomb, but I think the reaction has been remarkable. We've been proud of it.
Do you think that like a virtual internship, I mean, like so much of the internship process is like having FaceTime, like, you know, and seeing things that, you know, you just see over the course of an 8 or 10 hour day, just that are happening in the office. Like, you know, what do you think that, well, what would you say would be the limitations of a virtual internship, or how can it be properly utilized?
Well, the limitation, I mean, it's an obvious one in the sense of, I mean, lots of conversations happen when you walk past people, and you can begin connectivity. And that's a trade-off, but I mean, I think the lesson for students is that you've got to be prepared. As an owner, things happen, and you've got to be responsible for ensuring you achieve your goal. I think much of internships period is about execution. I spoke to one of Rick's colleagues, Adrian Foley, and he was saying one of the challenges of even in-person internships is sometimes students don't get broad exposure to people at Brookfield, for example. What we've done is we place students into teams of 10. Every team has a set of 3 to 4 mentors from Brookfield, from Ruby Management Company, but also from Columbia Strategy Real Estate. And those students have direct contact and exposure with mentors. So I think it's not perfect. I think it's a pretty close solution to making the best of a challenging summer.
Mm-hmm. Jim, I did want to ask you, like, you know, so REBNY has done a number of internships, or been involved with a number of internship programs over in the past. You know, how important are these programs to, I guess, the REBNY members?
But I mean, it's a critical part of establishing a pipeline. And, you know, I mean, before the recent pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, we understood diversity was a challenge for the industry and something that needed to be tackled. You know, when Bill Rudin became chair, he put together the first diversity committee at REBNY, and it's chaired by Bernard Warren and Darcy Stakem. And, you know, under John Banks, one of the things we really started to focus on were summer jobs. And then, you know, what happened with the onset of the pandemic in March was the city pulled its funding for the customary summer jobs program. And we were trying to figure out what to do. And, you know, just serendipity, Rick gave a call, and we had known about the project and the great work it had done. And Rick brought a great opportunity to us. So we quickly assembled, you know, a task force essentially comprised of Project Destin, CUNY, and REBNY to come up with a game plan. And, you know, Cedric, with his brilliance, you know, was able to lay out on the table a game plan for putting 100 students, you know, productively to work this summer, learning real estate skills, learning much more about the industry. CUNY was able to coalesce the talent and provide the students right away. And we approached the community, we approached the Board of Governors, and people like Brookfield, Tishman Speyer, Donald Zucker really stepped up to provide the funding to make this program happen.
Mm-hmm. Cedric, I would love to ask you a little bit about the composition of the people who participate in Project Destin. Like, do you look for students who you think you can get excited about real estate, or are they coming to you?
I mean, it works both ways. I mean, we ultimately partner with schools and with corporates to go into communities where we think they're underserved in terms of exposure. It's really the schools in our work together, we're identifying the students, but we're marketing it broadly. We're not just marketing to just the business students. It's a broad collection of folks who are curious about real estate. Our goal is really to take your aspiration to better understand real estate in your community, and then layer on top of that tons of exposure and education.
All right, so Jim, you mentioned the murder of George Floyd over in, I guess it was June, or might have been May. So let me ask you this. How has this been sitting with the real estate community? Like, what has there been, like, a thought, okay, we really do have to rethink about like diversity and questions like that in real estate?
Yeah, I mean, when you put that together with the pandemic, and you look about not only in New York City, but nationwide, the impact of the pandemic on communities of color, and then the murder of George Floyd, it really makes one take a step back to realize, while there might have been gains on diversity and inclusion, we have a long way to go. And really a need for a step back and it's not only real estate, I think it's going on in other industries as well, sort of taking a step back and sort of realizing there's so much more to go, and really determining, what's an action plan that needs to get implemented so that we're not having the same conversation moving forward 2, 3, 4 years from now.
Rick, I did want to get like your take on what happened. Like when this happened, like, what were your thoughts, and what were the thoughts of some of the other real estate owners that you spoke to?
Yeah, I think we and others have always. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Are you guys getting feedback when I talk?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, turn it down a little. While we and others have always recognized the importance of diversity and inclusion, and have strived to have the composition of our workforce reflect that of the communities where we're located and invested, I think the events of the last several weeks have just underscored the fact that there's a lot more to do, and we haven't done enough, and we need to pick up our game. So, I think in addition to being the right thing to do, increased racial diversity and equality gives us just a better perspective, enhances our investment process and the value of our business. And it's also, frankly, just based on the feedback that we've received from our employees and investors, it's extremely important to them as well. So, I think this has been a bit of a wake-up call to the industry, and we're all sort of working hard to see that change occurs as swiftly as possible.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. So Cedric, aside from these virtual internships, what are some of the students who are involved in Project Destined like actually doing on it's sort of an amorphous term to say, all right, well, it's an internship. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we can, we're trying to place them in the seat of an owner. So we place them on actual live deal teams where they're looking at investing in properties in their community. So what does that mean? They're looking at a package from a broker. They're doing all the work of property analysis, valuation, financing, and they're doing it in partnerships with lots of the colleagues from many of the firms in New York real estate. And so it's critical for us to, again, you got to put them in that seat where they're analyzing live situations. They're going through the full process, and they're building relationships on the way. And then we close it out where they're telling a story. They're actually doing an investment presentation where they're presenting to a set of executives an opportunity in their community. And I would say one of the biggest pieces of it for us is the use of partnerships. So it's everyone from obviously Rebney and Brookfield. We surround them with students from Columbia's Graduate School of Real Estate, where they're working with graduate school students analyzing live situations. And we found that mix gives them exposure to real situations, but also gives them a network, which we all know is so important in real estate.
And I mean, just in terms of the, I think I asked a little bit ago just about getting the students, interested in it. Yeah. So tell us just a little bit about I guess some of the student projects that and I guess also the student reactions to the business. I mean, have they seen sort of the discrepancies that are there in the industry, and what have been their thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, we had a course on Monday. We were asking the question, how do you respond, if you're an owner to COVID-19? And I think that's the kind of situation that builds curiosity, because they understand it's not just about the physical real estate, but it's about the people and the customers. And so I think as much as possible, we're trying to create curiosity because we're showing them the broad supply chain of real estate. It's not just the developers, it's not just the construction trades, it's not just the architects. There's a broad supply chain of jobs that make real estate viable. So in so many ways, we're using the owner's seat to expose them to the broad array of opportunities, and then they'll find a place that's naturally interesting to them, and then build curiosity from there.
So now I did want to talk to, get all of your opinions about like the fact that school, like, I feel like this is like one of the most, thing that I think about most, just in terms of how much damage this COVID-19 is doing to, New York, the city, the world, et cetera. Just the fact that might be another year of like, academic school in which, a lot of these students will be, forced to do it virtually, which, I have a 5-year-old son. I know what that's like and how you can lose attention and stuff like that. What do you think that's going to do just in terms of another like semester or hopefully not another year doing remote learning and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a problem. I think the educational content won't be as robust. And, as someone who's the parent of 2 college-age kids, I think they'll be missing out on, personal growth opportunities and memories that you just can't get back.
Do you think that there will be like just, I don't know, I feel like so much of an internship program or something else like that is fed into by, your experiences at school or teachers saying like, okay, you're interested in business. This is one pursuit you can take, like, real estate. This is like, something that, this is a path. Do you think that, is there any kind of, plan to make up for that?
I mean, Max, I'll jump in. Like, I don't know if there's a plan to make up for it, but I think there's an important lesson you gotta be able to adjust to the environment and still be successful. And so I think it creates a big opportunity for experiential types of learning. I mean, we're partnering with CUNY, and in the fall, we've got a 3-credit-hour course with the support of obviously Brookfield and Tishman Speyer and Rebney and others. But, students are going to be able to look at live experiences. And yes, again, it won't be in person, but because it's not in person, we could probably train 100 students, not 40, because we can scale it so much more successfully. So I think we've got to acknowledge the challenges of it. It's not going to happen overnight in terms of finding a vaccine, but I think we've got to find other solutions that can complement traditional education to create new pathways for students.
Let me switch gears a little bit here and let's talk about like, the government role that could be in this. What do you think Albany has Albany been playing a useful or not useful role in, I guess, funneling more people into real estate, making that field more diverse? Jim, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, we found the government partners in these initiatives to be very helpful. I mean, just the most recent example is, CUNY quickly mobilized to help provide the talent for Cedric's program this summer. We're also running weekly panels with CUNY right now, career panels where members of the real estate community come in and present to CUNY students to apprise them of different job opportunities and career opportunities in real estate. So, I think with everything government has on its plate right now, which is considerable, I think they've been very responsive partners in what we've been seeking to do.
Do you think that, I feel like real estate has a somewhat negative reputation these days, just like from some progressive politicians, just in terms of it's a very rich field and there's like a lot of questions of income inequality. Has that in any way eased, or am I imagining that?
Well, like many cities, New York City's, prior to the pandemic, experienced considerable growth, and that's created stresses in the housing market, and sort of strains of NIMBYism, for lack of a better term. I think you're going to see the dialogue changing as the conversation moves forward, where jobs and economic opportunity are really going to take on paramount importance. When you look at the situation we're in, luckily we have unemployment levels rivaling what we'd seen in the Great Depression. The city and state are going to be facing deficits now for the next several years that are really going to sort of challenge their ability to get things done. And I think it's going to put more and more importance on the ability to create jobs, the ability to create economic development and activity, to generate tax revenue to pay for basic government services. So I'm sure there'll be continued calls for ideas like canceling rent and, NIMBY-like behavior where you don't want to see development in your neighborhood. But, I think what's going to play out over time is such ideas are going to be seen as ill-conceived and not really fitting into the challenges that face the city and state as they move forward.
Well, you definitely pointed to one of the, I guess, the big question marks that is in this whole thing is like, well, what happens for the question of like, a diverse field when there's almost certainly going to be a big budget crisis next year or so. Do any of you, do you guys think that a lot of diversity efforts are going to suffer as a result of that?
I don't think so. I think construction is going to be a critical field moving forward, and we've taken a number of steps in that area. First off, starting in 2017, we became the major partner program for Building Skills, which entry-level job placements on construction sites throughout the city. And we retooled the program in 2017. Since then, we've made 1,000 job placements throughout the city. 100% city residents, about 97% persons of color. We expect that program to build more and more. And then also, our members like Brookfield are the predominant employers of union construction labor in New York City. And at the end of the last year, we reached a groundbreaking agreement with the Building and Construction Trades Council, where we're going to work together on the larger projects to make sure that union contractors have a fair shot to bid along with non-union contractors. And what we've seen over time is that'll result in more and more union work, which we think is a very good thing. And we think that's a means by which to bring more and more talent and diverse talent to the table.
Rick, yeah. Good.
Yeah, Max, I would just, add, clearly there are budget issues now that have occurred as a result of COVID, and absent some kind of federal support, there may be some pressure on some government-sponsored social programs. But, here's where I'd say the real estate industry, I think, historically has gotten a bit of a bad rap. Over and over again in moments like this, the real estate industry has sort of stepped up and done their part to help, fill that gap. For example, Project Parachute is a program that REBNY was sponsoring behind, where we provide support to tenants who may face themselves, under eviction because, they haven't been able to pay their rent or whatever. And, there are a lot of these kind of programs that the real estate industry has supported. And I commend Jim and the Real Estate Board in New York for that. And, and also things like we recently partnered with Union Square Hospitality and Rethink, to help restaurant workers get back to work, to provide meals for food sensitive during periods of times like this. And, I just say the industry has been sort of great at filling that void.
So I did want to ask, like, beyond, so obviously internships are very important funnel into the business. I'm wondering if there are, what other ideas are out there? Like, you, Rick, I know you speak to other owners every day. Jim, you speak to owners every day. Cedric, you speak to everybody in real estate every day. Has there been any other ideas or plans?
Well, look, I think there are lots of things that the industry is doing in addition to this internship program. You know, for example, the industry, I think, has been very involved in mentoring young kids, you know, through Big Brothers and Big Sisters program, through the New York STEP program, Success Through Engaging Professional program, sort of, you know, providing sort of mentorship to these kids. I know our organization has been very involved with women in need. You know, basically homeless women, you know, often come from domestic abuse sort of situations. You know, we've sent our women's network in to sort of work with them, to mentor them, and in many cases provide jobs. So, you know, I think there's sort of lots of things that are being done.
And Max, I would say, I mean, yeah, from our side, it's all about early access. I remember at one of our events, one of Rick's colleagues, Charlie Howe, brought in one of his little brothers to an event, and I think the kid may have been as early as like 14 or 15, and I was quite inspired because I was like, well, obviously I love the work we do in terms of creating teams and there's mentors, but I thought there's something we really could do around one-to-one mentoring that starts as early as 9th grade. Because I think as much as we can create familiarity and access, we begin to build that big funnel. I always say, you know, the NBA doesn't start at 18 trying to recruit talent. They start as early as when you turn 5 years old, giving you basketball. I think with real estate, we can partner with Rebney and with Rick and others and begin creating that early access, that early mentoring, and starting much earlier in their life, but also giving them some one-to-one mentoring that's focused around projects that builds connectivity. So I think that's certainly an area that we're very focused on for the fall. And with the support of Rebney and CUNY, we think we can do it starting at the college level, but then building to high schools.
I would love to get, Rick, your view on mentoring as well. Just like, you know, what that process is like, and what people are learning in this process. I mean, obviously Cedric touched on that, but, you know, what are some of the details on some of the things that you pick up from these mentorship?
Sorry, Max, I couldn't quite hear you.
I was just saying, what are some of the things that, you know, people pick up from some of these mentorships, some of the details?
Yeah, look, I think it's a lot. One, they get an exposure to our industry, and, you know, they you know, get a sense for whether or not it's complementary to their specific personality. They through mentorship get exposure to sort of teamwork and you know, learn sort of about the industry, and it helps sort of build confidence. You know, it's pretty amazing. We didn't really mention today how we stumbled across Project Destin, but, you know, Brookfield is building 1,300 apartments under the Affordable New York program in the Bronx. And, you know, for us, we felt like it wouldn't be a successful project if we didn't engage with the community in the process. So we wanted to do two things. We wanted to, you know, one, to the largest extent that we could, hire people from the Bronx to work on the project, but also engage the young people within the community to help them learn about real estate, to give them an introduction to real estate. And, you know, we came across Cedric in Project Destin. You know, we immediately got involved with his program. And this is a few years ago, where we brought these young kids in. We spent, you know, one day a month with them, you know, gave them a lesson about real estate, which they used in their capstone projects that they presented to us. And it's really great to see the enthusiasm, you know, the intellect, the drive, determination, and ambition of these kids. And I think it makes a big difference, but also, you know, gets them interested in investing back into their communities and potentially a career in real estate. So, you know, since that time, we've partnered with Project Destin in a number of cities. We've done it Los Angeles, you know, we've explored Nashville, Baltimore, possibly London. It's really a great program.
You did mention something that I did want to discuss, which was, does New York have, I guess, unique issues with these things, or is this diversity problem everywhere? Is it equal in a lot of different cities, or you know? Well, I pose the question. So, Cedric, do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, we see the same challenge everywhere. I mean, real estate is a relationship-driven business, and we've got to work to get students and diverse talent in the room where people are making decisions about talent and getting them comfortable that there's a diverse pipeline of amazing talent. So I see the challenge in all the markets that we operate in. I think what's exciting about New York is because of its entrepreneurial spirit, is that it can be a call to action for so many other cities. I mean, look, after the revenue partnership was announced, we're talking to folks in LA, we're talking to folks in Durham, we're talking to folks in lots of markets about these same issues. But when they look at what we announced, they see a solution that's based upon partnerships. And I think when people see partnerships, they feel like it's in some way de-risked. So by anything, I think that New York can be a call to action for the nation. And I think we're giving them a model to follow. I mean, great organization like Revenue, proud partner like Brookfield has been with multiple cities with us. And you begin to see a solution for how you build that pipeline. And then you bring in CUNY and Columbia and others. So I think if anything, New York will be sort of, a torchbearer in this regard.
Jim, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I'm going to defer to Cedric, and as I like to say, they don't let me out of New York City too often. I don't think I've been out of this city more than 6 weeks of my life. So I'll take my advice from folks who are in those markets.
Has anybody who's a New Yorker been allowed outside of New York City for the last 4 months? So, Jim, I did want to touch on something that Rick mentioned, which I think is very interesting, and that you mentioned as well. You mentioned the NIMBY crowd, and I think that what Rick was saying was very important when he said that engaging the community is a very important thing. I'm curious what your members think about some of these things, like what is some of the feeling about community engagement versus some of the activists who are not in my backyard.
Well, I think those builders, developers, owners who are more experienced in the New York City landscape are very confident of the community outreach they do. It's always a very challenging process, but your chance of success increase with a lot of community outreach that's done up front and trying to design a project to account the needs. And I think that'll be a consistent factor moving forward.
Do you think that I guess that there's just more awareness of this, just now that this is such an issue that there's a big national conversation that's happening about this? Has anybody, I don't know, said, all right, this is going to be something that we have got to focus on now?
Do you mean diversity and inclusion, or about development movement?
Well, I think that, development in some of these, affordable housing developments in different neighborhoods, that, that there was going to be more of an effort to engage the community in that.
Well, I mean, I've been around long enough to know that, land use has always been somewhat controversial in New York City. I mean, if you go back 10, 20, 30 years, you can point to projects that, spurred a lot of conversation. I remember growing up sort of Westway along the west side of Manhattan was sort of the thing that captured everybody's attention. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. One of our challenges in New York City, to be perfectly frank, just given the population growth we experienced over the last few years, or over the last few decades, was essentially running out of space. Which really sort of forces a discussion about building up. So it's only natural that there'll be a robust discussion around land use actions when they start to play out in New York City. What I think is of greater concern that I think ought to be flagged for folks, and folks need to focus attention on, is I've alluded to the fact in the last few decades you've seen tremendous population growth in New York City. The last 3 years, the city lost population, which is a very bad indicator about where the city's headed, because you could argue that it's essentially people voting with their feet. And now with the pandemic, the New York Times published in May that 5% of the population left the city. And these are factors I think that we public officials are really going to have to start focusing on as we look to sort of rebuild the economy of the city and the state.
What are some of your, I guess, like, it's a very, long answer, I'm sure, but what do you think are some of the solutions to that?
I mean, job creation is going to be, topic A, right? And they've got to be good jobs that pay, basic benefits and wages to live in New York City. So that's why it's going to be important to make sure that construction projects continue and get started that provide things like affordable housing, new commercial office space that is sustainable and environmentally friendly for the 21st century. And there's going to be a real focus on sort of restarting small businesses who you got to imagine have really taken it on the chin because of the economic consequences of the pandemic.
Rick and Cedric, what are your thoughts about this? Is this a fear of yours that New York is, losing momentum and losing population?
Well, certainly the statistics aren't great, but I think in the long run, New York will be just fine. It's a place where young people want to come. They want to live and work here, and I think businesses chase talent, but no question there's some work to be done over the next couple of years. The tax situation doesn't really help. I think pre-COVID there was a number of people that have sort of left New York because of the lack of deductibility for state and local income taxes, and there are other sort of issues like that. But it's just, as an investor, I'd say we always take a long-term view. These things tend to sort themselves out, but for sure there's some work to be done.
Cedric, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm long New York. I mean, so I think the bigger question is really from where I sit, retooling, talent to take on the jobs of tomorrow, right? So I mean, there's going to be all kinds of new areas that are going to come out of this current time period, and we've got to get sort of people available to take on those jobs. So I worry less about New York losing population because I think that New York will figure it out. I worry more about, with this downturn, making sure that we've got diverse talent ready to go to take advantage of what opportunities are available.
I'm curious, Cedric, so you've got this whole class of students in Project Destin. So what are some of their ideas? Like, they must be having some thoughts about how to deal with like a COVID crisis. Had there been any thoughts that came out that you were just like, oh my God, my mind is blown?
No, I mean, I think many of them, again, the first class that we teach is really, we've got to get you oriented to think like an owner, not like a tenant, right? So job one is just helping them get the orientation that, lowering revenue and increasing cost is not necessarily a sustainable path forward. So after we do that, I mean, I think their creativity really begins to flow. But I think what comes out of it is just a real focus on taking care of and protecting, your customer. I mean, they don't use these terms, but finding ways to provide extra and sort of support around sort of health checks is obviously critical. I mean, one of them said, well, we should just have folks just walk around cleaning just for the appearance that we're keeping things clean. I mean, so it's just some of those novel ideas, because I think that's what they look for to derive their own comfort. I think the other place is that you get questions like, well, should we sell in a downturn? And you begin to help them think about, well, when you got a downturn and you're an owner, it's time to really tighten your belt strap, but then just focus on delivering, high quality service. So I would say there's always an amazing back and forth between the folks like Rick who come and speak to our students in our community, because they're trying to understand, when you consider the owner and you can make those decisions, what are the tools at your disposal to be successful?
And Rick, I just wanted to get a little bit of a sense from you of some of the interns who have come through your office. What I guess what were some of the things that you've gained most from having them as part of Brookfield?
Look, for us, the internship program is a big part of our recruiting and hiring initiative. We're a big organization. Our real estate group alone has 22,000 people in it today. I think when I started, it was 100. And so, we get to bring these young people in, get a look at them, see how they work in a team environment. Our culture is all about sort of teamwork, and sort of get exposed to their youth and enthusiasm. So I don't know. It's like as I said, it's an important part of our recruiting process.
Jim, I did want to talk to you about some of the other programs and initiatives that have come out to try to diversify real estate. You mentioned building skills. Tell us a little bit about some of the programs that have been successful in the past and why they've been successful.
Well, I mean, building skills has been around since 2012, but REBNY itself got heavily involved in 2017, working with a series of other affordable housing developers in New York City. Talent always matters. We did a terrific job bringing in a team of people to oversee the program, and they've been able to exponentially grow it. Another key feature to anything you do is the partners you have, right? So we've been blessed here to be teaming up with Project Destin and CUNY. Something else that we've started recently is we've teamed up with Coro. And in the spring, we announced the first class of REBNY Fellows, which will be starting this September. And it's 20 individuals who are already in the real estate industry. It's a diverse class, and they'll be going through a 6-month program of leadership training, getting them involved in some of the trickier advocacy issues involved in real estate, and really looking to sort of cultivate these individuals as the future leaders of the real estate industry in New York City.
Okay. We did get a lot of questions in advance, and I see a few coming through as well. So let's, we do want to take some time for some questions from the audience. This was a question we got a couple of days ago. Do you think there will be a lot of new tenants seeking retail space in Nassau County in the next 6 months? That's an interesting question. Jim, why don't you start with that? Do you think that, obviously we were talking about New York missing out on some people. So do you think that Nassau is going to be the beneficiary of this?
Well, I think, one of the issues the city is facing, and it's been written about, is, and I alluded to it before, is that there's a segment of the population of the city that's believed to have left, hopefully on a short-term basis, and they're relocating, in part to the suburbs outside the city. But with respect to the specific question, I haven't seen any case made that there'll be a redeployment of retailers from within the 5 boroughs to Nassau County. And yeah, I can say that with some experience, someone who's a lifelong Queens guy and who lives in Belrose. I'm literally a 5-minute walk from the Nassau border. So I'm sort of pretty familiar with that dynamic.
Here's a question for Rick. What core areas is Brookfield focusing on from an investment standpoint in a post-COVID-19 world?
Well, I think for us, it's more or less business as usual. We're of course looking for opportunities to be helpful in recapitalizing businesses that are struggling. But we like the apartment sector, we like the industrial sector, we like the office sector. We're pretty heavily invested in retail, and I don't think much change is for us. Although our expectation is that there will be some opportunities coming out of what's going on right now.
Here's one. Does your diversity plan uplift low-wage workers that are more likely to be people of color and could achieve real equity through having access to collective bargaining rights? That's an interesting question. I guess the pay equality is a very interesting question. So, Jim, has that been part of the conversation?
Well, yeah, we're looking to impact the construction market, which is very broad and expansive and large in New York City. So, on the one hand, we have programs like Building Skills where we've proven success in a market where unemployment was as low as 3%, helping New Yorkers that were otherwise having problems finding employment, find gainful employment in construction and get a foothold in the start of a career. On the other hand, partnering with the Building and Construction Trades Council, because again, revenue members account for the lion's share of union construction in New York City. And the more union construction that we can stimulate in New York City, the more good quality jobs that are being produced.
Here's one. What sorts of new ideas is the industry adopting for affordable housing? And how does that encourage diversity when people have traditionally been resistant to diverse neighborhoods? Does anybody want to take that one?
Well, we were supporters of the mandatory inclusionary housing program that got put forward by the de Blasio administration and the city council. I think the great challenge that the city is going to face moving forward is, this mayor and the prior mayor should be commended for the affordable housing programs they put together. They put considerable resources into it. The city and state just won't have those resources moving forward. And with that said, affordable housing creation and preservation is going to remain critically important to the city's future. So it's really going to be incumbent about government working with the private sector in ways to continue affordable housing production in New York City, and trying to do it at AMIs that are low enough that speak to the real needs of hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers.
A question for Rick. Has Brookfield seen an increase in demand from investors for social impact investing? If so, what are the ways Brookfield is thinking about measuring those outcomes and target returns?
Well, for sure, it's important to institutional investors, that some of their investing is earmarked for socially conscious projects, and I think a big part of any investor's qualification of an investment manager is what is their position on social issues and the environment and that kind of thing. So we don't have currently any specific funds focused on those kind of projects, but I'd say in everything that we do, we're very focused on the environment, on diversity, and all the things that would be important to our employees and our investors.
Cedric, have you also seen that from other developers and owners that you deal with on a regular basis?
Yeah, no, we're seeing an increasing number of developers who have interest in exploring, partnerships with us where.
Did you lose us, Cedric? I think Cedric froze. Sorry about that. Okay, well, so here's one that came in a couple of days ago. How will REBNY encourage diversity of development in addition to people? How will you pipeline mid-career pros into CRE principal roles, acquisition, sales, advisories, versus back office PM roles? Should a second wave hit, what will happen to business owners who just made it through the first? What will be with retail? All right, that's like a bunch of questions, but
right. But on the diversity front, I think there's several things that need to move forward simultaneously. One I mentioned before is about outreach and partnerships. So we need to continue to develop new partnerships. So for example, this afternoon, we're hosting a webinar with CURE about how to encourage diverse hiring practices within the real estate industry. But that has to be a constant factor moving forward in terms of building new relationships with organizations and gaining new perspective. Number two is, building a pipeline, which we spent a lot of conversations about today, working with organizations like Project Destin, working with CUNY. You probably should expect more announcements from REBNY, CUNY, and Project Destin moving forward in terms of partnerships. We have to take a look at what we can be doing at the high school level as well. The third thing, which I referred to, is just within the industry itself, what can we do to elevate diversity? So the REBNY Fellows Program I cited before was an example of that, where we're going to look to really develop a diverse leadership team in the real estate industry. And also part of sort of encouraging diversity in the industry is a conversation with the different companies and the folks that run HR in terms of what more we all can be doing in terms of recruiting. And then the final thing is a conversation we need to have in the community about, how we put economic power behind the idea of diversity and inclusion, and a conversation, and then going out publicly as to what we can do in terms of hiring and contracting to really promote the idea of diversity and inclusion moving forward.
Well, I put the question both to Rick and Cedric. Cedric, you're back. Thank goodness.
Back.
What about, obviously we've been talking a lot today about entry, into the business, but what about middle and upper management ranks? What are some of the things that are being done in that area?
Well, I mean, I think the big job that needs to be done is really demystifying a pathway to success. I mean, I think that so many young people starting their careers, they've got great energy and excitement, but they just don't understand the requirements to be successful, both the hard and the soft skills. And so a big part of the work with Rebney and Rick is really thinking about, well, once the person arrives, how do we lay out the set of skills they need to acquire over time so they can go from an analyst all the way up to a managing partner? And so I think that's an important part of our work, frankly, and where I call on Rick a lot, is really understanding that toolkit and then working with their HR group to figure out how we identify the talent early and push them through that supply chain. But I think it needs some demystifying.
Yeah, Max, I would add just, for us, we're an organization that to the extent we can prefers to home grow our senior executives. And of course that takes time. So what we've done is we've set up a diversity network similar to our Women's Network or LGBTQ network and our Young Professionals Network that really focuses on the things that we can do to enhance our recruiting, our training, our developing, and the satisfaction of our employees so that we could, advance them through the ranks as quickly as we can. This is an important initiative for us. It's so important that Brian Kingston, the CEO of our real estate group, has personally taken on the leadership of it. And something that he's overseeing together with a couple of minority executives. So I think for us it'll take a little bit of time, but making sure that we are able to attract these people, train them, and get them to be senior executives as fast as possible is important to us.
We got a question here. How do you see technology enhancing traditional brick and mortar real estate in response to public health and economic recovery? It's a little bit off of what we're talking about today, but I actually don't think it's that off. Do you think that there's a role for technology in all these things, in questions of pandemic, but also in terms of making real estate more equitable? I guess that maybe that's no on that.
Max, one thing I would say is that, it all starts with talent. I think, we launched a program a few weeks ago in real estate digital marketing because we see it as a place of tremendous growth. And so developing a diverse pipeline for that sector when it's new and it's growing fast, I think it's a place for us to go and talk to our partners and say, hey, we're now training students in digital marketing. Let's understand your strategy in digital marketing and see there are opportunities for us to collaborate with you and build in that pipeline that ends up at Brookfield or ends up at Tishman Speyer. So we're taking it as an opportunity to leverage technology to create new jobs and expose our students to new fields.
I think this is a question that would be good for Jim, but so we touched on it a little bit. Has local government been helpful or harmful to the real estate industry in the last period of time, last few months?
Listen, these are among the toughest times in the city's history. I think both city and state levels of government have performed very well in some very trying times. We have found them very accessible and responsive in terms of the various issues that the real estate industry has been facing. Does that mean we see eye to eye in every issue? No, not really. But we have found at both the city and state level that public officials who are willing to have necessary conversations and take the actions see us all through these very tough times.
Here's one that I think is actually a very practical question. We've been talking a lot about giving people, entry, like a start, the tools, the education to, start in this business. So here's one. How can one start his or her facilities management business under such unstable environment with COVID-19? I put that to all three of you. How would you start a facilities management business in this time?
I mean, I'd imagine it's more challenging, right? Because economic activity has been reduced, and that, like any business, I'd imagine networking is sort of a key part of it. But the one thing is, we always find in crisis, people find ingenious ways to sort of move things forward.
So here's one. Why have real estate prices gone up or stayed stable throughout this crisis? I guess we're talking a big, broad real estate question. So I put to you, Rick. Why have real estate prices gone up or stayed stable throughout this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question and observation. I mean, the truth is the level of transaction activity in the real estate space has been greatly diminished. So I'm not really sure that there's enough data points to really substantiate the fact that prices have stayed level or gone up. I mean, the truth is those that can wait and be patient and not transact have chosen to do so. I think there's a lot of there's a great view long term that real estate is a valuable asset, and a lot of waiting to see what will happen to demand once we get through COVID-19. So I would argue that maybe prices are stable, but there hasn't really been enough activity.
Mm-hmm. And here's another one for you, Rick, that came in. What core areas is Brookfield focusing on from an investment standpoint in a post-COVID-19 world?
I think we sort of touched on this earlier, and we are still very, I think we're focused on all sectors. We've invested a lot in building our multifamily business over the last few years. That won't change. We've historically loved the office sector. I don't think that'll change. We like the industrial sector. Unlike many others, we are a believer in retail assets. We think there's a redevelopment play there. So I don't think COVID is really changing our investment view that much. The only thing that I would say is that our expectation is that there will be some recapitalization opportunities that come along that hopefully we'll be able to take advantage of.
Okay, well, we have time for one more question. We did get a controversial question, which I will pose to all of you guys, and feel free to answer it how you like. Unions like Laborers Local 79 are made up of a majority of people of color. Why do you choose not to work with a union that is transformative for formerly incarcerated immigrant and women construction laborers in receiving fair pay, healthcare, and retirement plans?
Yeah, I just think the premise of the question in terms of refusing to work with Local 79 is not correct. As I referenced before, revenue members account for the lion's share of union construction in New York City. We've been working very closely with the Building and Construction Trades Council, both during this onset of the pandemic. Gary LaBarbera has been an absolutely terrific partner. Since the start of my presidency at REBNY, have been working very closely with Gary and the trade unions on the agreement I referenced earlier in this interview. And, we had a lot of conversations around the prevailing wage legislation that got passed in Albany this year. There's always going to be times where we might not see eye to eye on a particular piece of legislation. One of the last meetings I took before the pandemic was actually sit down with Bobby Bonanza, who runs Local 79, to talk about legislation that's of mutual interest to us. And, we look forward to continuing those conversations moving forward. We look forward to opportunities working together, and we look forward to opportunities to putting Local 79 members to work in New York City.
Well, on that note, I think we are out of time, but I did want to thank you, all three of you, for joining me today. This is a very, I think, very important conversation to have. I want to thank our sponsor, Burden LLP, and I wanted to thank everybody who tuned in for watching this program. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Max. Bye-bye.
Dad, Mom had such a great vision for the company. I don't know that I can keep it going.
Amy, your mother worked with Burden to develop a plan. Don't worry.
Life and business can be hard, but finding the right advisor to help you, your family, and your business get where you want them to go doesn't have to be.
Stephen, get Burden on the line.
Burden LLP. We listen, we solve, we do.